I think I know almost everybody, but in case I don't, there's some new faces. My name is Joyce Frey, and I teach psychology among some other classes here at PCC. Been here since '06, so been here a while. I want to thank Sandra and the library for hosting this. Refreshments and all, how wonderful of them, and I thank all of you for coming. It's really nice to get support from peers, and really nice to get support from the institution that you work at. I would like to say that I would not even be doing this or attempting this without the support, and it started with Dr. Woj, and Dr. Calvert has continued that support. They allow me to be gone when I need to be gone, and you know, it just makes it happen when, you know, in another position, in another job, you probably couldn't do it all together. So there's like several categories that I want to talk about briefly. First of all, I get questions about what's a dissertation. A lot of people, even in the academic world, are not really aware of what entails a PhD, what it's all about, how you do that. And then I want to talk a little bit about my particular degree, which is in international psychology. Not everybody understands what that is because it is very new. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my proposal and about what I'm doing to get my dissertation completed. So that's kind of the overview. International psychology is doing research, doing studies that cross international boundaries. It's not the same as multicultural, which could be within your community. We have a multicultural community here. It's cross-cultural, which means that you have to cross an international boundary and study the way people do things in that country. It is a little different paradigm from what people are kind of normally used to, because especially in psychology, because the Western world, American and European ideas of psychology have pretty much led the way we think of psychology, and we've neglected some of the other cultural influences on that. So international psychology is a way to develop a global and universal, maybe, paradigm of what psychology can and will become in the future, taking into account all of the different nations and their cultural influences, which are all different. So, what's a dissertation? Well, it's a life-altering process. I never thought that it was going to be so all-consuming and time-consuming and difficult. It is the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. If you ever tackle one, make sure that it's something that you really, really are emotionally invested in and believe in strongly, because otherwise you're going to get so sick of it that you won't even be able to finish it. So my topic came from a couple of different sources. The title of it is Exploring Intelligence from a Plains Cree Perspective, and it's a qualitative study. Many years ago, I used to raise Appaloosa horses, and I learned about the tragedy of the way our mainstream, the way our government treated the indigenous peoples, the Native Americans of this country, through that process. How they slaughtered their horses, their Appaloosa horses. And that led me to become an advocate for Native Americans. So in Canada, they aren't called Native Americans, they're called First Nations people. They actually have 3 divisions. First Nations, which is a choice by each individual tribe. And in Canada, there's about, in Saskatchewan, there's about 200,000 population of Indigenous people, about 135 different tribes. They call them bands there. So it's a way that they choose to identify themselves rather than Indian. They choose First Nation. The Métis people are the half-breeds, and they call themselves half-breeds. That's not a derogatory term. Primarily from the French explorers that came in and the early English explorers that came in. And then there is the Inuit population, which is in the far northern, the Eskimo populations. So I'm just dealing with First Nations people, the people in Saskatchewan, and I have been granted permission by one of the local organizations, the Treaty 6 Education Council organization gave me permission to come in and do research with 9 bands that are members of that organization. And it didn't come easy getting that permission, let me tell you. I spent quite a couple of years actually trying to infiltrate, to gain somebody's permission to come and do the studies up there. I mean, I can recall one conversation with a Native American president of a university of and in Canada, First Nations, and being discriminated against because I was white. She was all excited and happy to do this, and then she said, "And what band are you with?" And I hesitated for a moment, and I said, Italian, but she just went ballistic. How dare I infringe upon Native Indigenous people's territory? How dare I do that when there are qualified people right there that can do it? So I was afraid I was never going to get in, and then I went to a conference in Saskatoon and had the wonderful pleasure of meeting Shaman Wes Finday, who is portrayed in this slideshow. He is a knowledge keeper, a shaman, a medicine man, an international traveler. He teaches customary law at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and he speaks all over the world. So educated, articulate, and a unique individual, to say the least. He was speaking, and I'm wandering around at this conference, and I heard him, and I thought, this is a person I need to contact. And I asked him for help, and he said, yes, I would help you. But I had to go through a whole series of, and they don't do interviews. That's not the way they work. They sit down and tell stories. And he would tell me a story, and he'd watch my reaction, and at the end of that, he decided that I was worthy to come and do study with their people. So that was my first door that was open. And I went again last summer in May and spent about 10 days on the reservation, totally, completely immersed in that culture. And you see here a medicine bag. This was made by an Indigenous woman specifically for me. It's out of deer skin, and she hand painted. You see an Appaloosa horse there. Remember me just mentioning Appaloosa horses? So I went through what is called a spirit naming process, and these are some of the photos from that process. There are 2 sacred sites on the Sweetgrass, which is one of the reservations and one of the bands that I'm working with. And Elder Finday is a member of the Sweetgrass Nation. I received my spirit name from him going through ceremonies and rites. I spent many days learning the ceremonies and the rites of what I needed to do that. And he gave me my spirit name, which is Chachaka Ashtim Ishkweyu, which in Cree means spotted horsewoman. Yeah. So that's how I got to do this. Now the academic side of it is what you see here. A dissertation consists of writing a huge paper and doing the research yourself. Yeah, it's enormous. And I was in Chicago in February and presented this poster and my proposal for the research to the committee there, and they okayed that I could actually go do the research. I also had to do an internal review board. Every university has an IRB board, so I had to present what I was going to do. They are the overseers and protectors of human subjects in research projects, so I also had to come to submit all of my information to an internal review board and get permission to finally go to Canada and do this. I'm using a an integrated methodology. It's qualitative, not quantitative. I'm not doing number crunching, which most people think of. I am doing qualitative research, which is about talking to people, listening to their stories. In this case, I'm integrating indigenous research methodology. When I started out, I was just doing phenomenological research. And when I went to Canada, Shaman Fine Day listened to my proposal, and he said, "That's great, you can do it that way." He said, "It'll be meaningless to the people here." And I said, "Why?" And he explained to me that indigenous research methodology really would be the best way to do that. So being cross-cultural, culturally sensitive, international psychology, I brought that back to the chair of my committee and proposed that I be able to use that. Indigenous research methodology is not acceptable in almost any institution of higher learning in the world. It was a miracle that she allowed me to use it, because still indigenous understandings, epistemology, ontology, axiology is not accepted in the Western academic world. I'm hoping that this research will not only open doors to understanding what intelligence is from another culture's point of view, but also to educate the academy on different ways of doing research, and indigenous research is one of those. So you can see we have to write abstract, which is just a summary of what we propose to do. We have to do a background. Why? Where did all this information come from? We have to write a literature review. My proposal is 168 pages of blood, sweat, and tears, 171 references. A few of them are listed here. I've been writing for 3.5 years on this, and it finally has come to this. You propose a conceptual framework, which is a paradigm, a model for different theories that you'll use. I'm using spiritual intelligence, multiple intelligences, and decolonization approach, which is an indigenous method of understanding. One of the things that is very important here to understand is what the purpose of this. What can understanding the Cree and how they think about intelligence, what difference does that make to anybody in the world? Well, the hope is that it will enlighten the education process for them. You know, all of the IQ tests are skewed horribly towards Western ways of thinking and towards that quantitative, let's put everything into numerical value. So I'm hoping that this will enlighten the education process. and also maybe even the political, the government influence. You know, the Cree, all of the indigenous peoples in Canada were colonized, brutally forced into submission. They've lost their land, they lost their culture, they lost so much. And hopefully the reestablishment of their way of understanding intelligence and giving credibility to that will lend some credence to them to have a little more leverage in being taken off the list of people that have to be taken care of. They're wards of the state, they're wards of the country. How would you feel if you were a ward of your country and had to be, supervised over everything? They didn't even have the right to leave the reservation without permission for a long time. They only gained the right to vote in 1967. The residential schools are a horrible example of how the indigenous people were treated. Elder Fine told a really great story that really brought that home to me, and I'll share that with you quickly. They have an oral history from 19 generations back. They used to make war with the Blackfoot, and he said at the end of wars, each tribe would exchange children so that those children could grow up knowing the culture of the opposing tribes. And then they would always forever be joined together. He said the white man came and he took our children, but he didn't give us their children. So, discussion comes next, potential findings, limitations, delimitations, all of the things that, enter into doing the research. Terms and definitions are discussed, possible conclusions are discussed, and in the end, whatever it turns out to be will be what it turns out to be. I'm using a computer program called Atlas to do the computerized version, because in this study you have to take all of the words, all of the themes, and compile them to make one general theme. Doing that by hand would be astronomical, because I'm doing 15 interviews with the 9 different tribes. So I've got a computer program that will do that for me, put it automatically into themes, and then all I have to do is analyze those themes and come up with a general, here is the Cree version of what human intelligence is. So if I've missed something, if there's something up there you don't understand, talked about the methodology, the problems, why it's a problem, what I hope to attain from this study, and the literature review. I also, I did like 5 other cultures and studied them around the globe to see what they thought about intelligence. And they all kind of fall into the basic spiritual or multiple intelligence categories. But that's no guarantee that the Cree people will feel the same. So it'll be, it's an adventure where I'm exploring what they think. So open the floor for questions, if you have any. Yes, sir.
I know that your program is an online program, primarily as far as the coursework, but each year you have to go to an international location for
it's like a practicum.
Can you kind of tell about that a little bit?
Sure. Part of the degree is you have to go to 2 field experiences, and it's like a little mini internship or a practicum that you would do in some other type of degree. I've been to Peru on my first one, and I'm going again in a couple of weeks to Peru again. We get to interact with local agencies, NGOs, schools, universities, businesses, whatever, and learn about how they run things in Peru. Yeah, what their ideas are. And a lot of people confuse this with clinical psychology. Everybody thinks psychology is all about clinical stuff, and it's not. That's only one small piece of it. So my degree is in systems and organizations, so that's why mine is a little different than what the typical idea of psychology is. Yes, ma'am.
Do you expect any language barriers in measuring intelligence, or will this be filtered through English, or will this be in there?
And that's a great question, and that was one of the things that that my committee was very intent upon, and also one of the issues that the Internal Review Board was very intent on. All of the people are English speakers. Remember those horrible residential schools I was talking about? They did not allow the children to speak their language. They were tortured if they did. They had needles stuck in their tongues if they spoke their native tongue. So that is one of the things that Canada is trying to do, reparations. And there are leaps and bounds ahead of the United States, but they've still got a long way to go. They're encouraging now the revival of all of the different languages, the native languages. But they're all English speakers, so I don't anticipate any problem. And my 15 interviewees will be elders in their community, so they'll be between the ages of 40 to 90 area. Yeah. Yes.
So I don't know if you can answer this, but after you do the research, of course, you'll take the information you have. What changes do you think you'll see or make for these Indigenous people, for the First Nations? Do you anticipate changes for the people in the way they educate their children?
Absolutely. I would anticipate that there would be more sensitive testing for intelligence in the mainstream schools where the Indigenous children are integrated to some degree. Also in the schools that are on the reservations. We've only looked at intelligence from that Western quantitative, let's stick a number on it, and that just doesn't work for them. So hopefully there will be a new standard of a way to determine intelligence and how to apply that to their learning. Yeah, and how they counsel children, the curriculum development, just, anything in the educational realm, absolutely. Yeah, that plus, as I said, the whole governmental thing of pulling a people they've tried to destroy, let's call it genocide, and giving them self-determination back again. If you think that you're dealing with a bunch of ignorant savages that have no intelligence, you're not going to be as open to giving them personal rights and group rights and making them not wards of the state anymore. So I think it should influence the mainstream, which is the European perspective.
So some of them actually are being taught on their own reservation, and some of them are mainstream in school.
What they've discovered through the mainstreaming of them is it's not working very well. They don't succeed very well in the mainstream schools, and that's part of the issue. Yeah, because they're not thought of as, and they just don't have the same mindset and the same way of viewing the world. Yeah. Although some of them have been very successful, it's individual. Children that are raised in the city and have parents that are working in mainstream, that's a whole different thing, but that's not very many of them. Most of them are still on the reserves. Yeah. And I've been on reserves in America, and they're pretty abysmal places. The poverty is unbelievable. The high rate of alcoholism and other drug abuse, incest, sexual abuse, violence, all of those things are prevalent. I didn't see as much in Canada. The Sweetgrass had substandard housing, but it wasn't that bad. I've lived in worse myself. So, yeah, it's a little better conditions there, but not much. Not much. Yeah.
Well, what do they do for their income? The Cree people,
A lot of them are in agriculture, they farm. By treaty rights, the Treaty 6 people, they were given specific quantity of land, so they all got a portion of land. Where I was, it looked like they all had, several acres of land, but I didn't see a lot of farming individually. They work in the mainstream as much as they can, depending on their education. They're manual laborers. They're just whatever you would think of as, uneducated for the most part people. Because they don't do well in school, and they don't do well in the mainstream. Yeah. It's a gap, needs to be a bridge built between the two peoples to repair all of the damages that were done. The Cree, the indigenous peoples, don't want to go back. They don't want all their land back. They don't want to go back to where they were 500 years ago. Of course not. But they do, and they should be granted the rights of self-determination and the ability to educate their children in their own way and be successful. Yeah. There's still a lot of prejudice and discrimination. Yeah, I see it there a lot. Yeah.
I can see the mainstream, schools being, somewhat open to, the studies, to making changes. Probably more so than I can see the indigenous people actually accepting those changes. Is that a fair assessment there, or is that not?
I'm not sure. Why do you think that the indigenous people would be less open to
Because
curriculum changes?
They have been more set in their, their customs and how they have done things. I wonder if that would be...
I don't know. That's an interesting perspective, and I hadn't thought about that. I mean, in my mind, I'm anticipating that they would be more open to having somebody bring in information that would make them excel.
And if it does help them excel, but I guess it's just like us, when we get something different in our lives, we don't want to change that, even though on the other side of it, it's going to help us out immensely, and we don't always see that right away. So I guess that's
and that just takes me right back to where I was meeting these dead ends, because people don't want to talk. Right. Because historically people have come into their schools, they've come into their communities. I'm the white man, I know what's right for you, and they've run over them and said, you change, you do this, you do this. So the acceptance there is minimal. That's where I am, trying to gain that trust and that understanding. Part of my methodology means I have to do that personally. I can't put up a flyer or send out an email and say, hey, I'm giving this little study, y'all come over. I can't just drive up to the res and say, I'm here, come on in. No. I have to spend quantity time meeting people individually, forming relationships with people in order to gain their trust, in order for them to allow me to interview them. So that's what makes it so time consuming. I'll be up there a couple of months probably this summer trying to get 15 people together across about a 200-mile radius of Saskatchewan. So very time intensive, very work intensive, not to mention very expensive. Yeah. Getting a Ph.D. is not an inexpensive pursuit. So, and I don't mind sharing with you, I'm about 120 grand into student loans right now. I guess the only hope I have is I won't live long enough to pay them all back.
When you were in Peru, obviously there's a population that is
indigenous in a whole different way, though.
So no real parallels there initially for you, or?
I didn't see any. Maybe this time, and that's a good question. We're supposed to be bringing questions to the table when we go, and that might pursue that, because we're going to be visiting schools there, the Innova schools, which are groundbreaking, and they want us to present to them on service learning. They want to incorporate service learning in their educational system, so that's good. And I'll just close with one story that people find amusing usually. Food is a very important part of culture everywhere you go. And so the first trip to Peru, we went out the first night. There were 15 of us, and one of the students, very young girl who's very food adventurous, wanted to try the national dish, which is cuy, C-U-I. Everybody's doing whatever, and they bring her food out on a platter. Cuy is guinea pig. There it was on its back, deep fried, head, little legs up in the air. And I'm like hyperventilating, thinking, be culturally sensitive, Joyce, don't run from the restaurant. So, you have to take into consideration all of the little sensitivities and different cultural things that happen. In Canada, I was spotted immediately as an American because I asked for iced tea, and they brought it, and it was sweet. And I said, oh no, could I have some regular tea? You mean hot tea? No, iced tea, but no sugar. Well, you're an American, aren't you? Yeah. So little things like that really set you off in a culture differently. Yeah.
Hard to see intelligence in an upside-down guinea pig, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what you call indigenous.
Yeah. I'm prepared now on my next trip there.
Indigenous.
Yeah, indigenous. Good one.
Before you close, what do you anticipate when you complete this degree for yourself personally with it, in terms of applications or?
I've already had several invitations to publish. Usually that's something that you don't get. It's very hard to get published in any journal. I've had 3 journals already ask me to publish the findings of this. So I'm hoping that will help my credibility. In an academic sense, I'm starting an international psychology consortium, which will be a group of international psychologists coming together to consult in an international basis. So we'll have laptop, we'll travel. We'll do whatever we can do around the world. And I have about a half a dozen of peers that are in the classes with me that I have recruited, that I find of compatible thought and mindset. So, yeah.
When are you hoping this will be done?
The end of December this year, which will be 4 years of it. Yeah.
Which by comparison is a very short
time.
course. Dissertation.
Sometimes it's,
In there
yeah,
with the
about
spouse.
7 years, 5 to 7 years, sometimes 10 years to complete one. So working, dissertation, life, wow. Don't leave you much time to sit on the sofa and eat bonbons. Yeah. A lot of people ask me, why are you doing this now? I'm 70, I'm going to be 71 in May. Why are you doing this now? And I'll tell you why. A student of mine challenged me. I was lecturing to her with the finger, you need to go on and get your Ph.D. Don't you dare stop here. You're young, you need to do this. And she said, well, what about you? Why don't you have one? Why don't you go get one? And I said, well, it's silly at my age. And she said, that's a pretty poor excuse if you ask me. And I had to think about that, and I did, and I decided, you know what? She was right. So I just went online and found this program that really fit me and fit what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I live in Maxville, as you know. What was I going to do? Sit there and watch the grass grow? There's nothing to do there. So I don't know. I'm hoping to stay in academia just a little bit, you know, teach part-time, see how that works. Yeah. Stay here at Pratt as long as I am welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Joyce.
You're welcome.